Because people look at obesity, not carbohydrate addiction, they'll try a diet. They'll try the latest fad diet. Oh, I'm going to do intermittent fasting. And they do great and they lose a lot of weight. I'm going to do Atkins. I'm going to become a vegan. It doesn't matter what the diet is. And then they fail and they gain the weight back. But they don't say, I made a mistake. They say, this diet didn't work. And they go from diet to diet to diet to diet. And I've got so many people that come in here that tell me, oh, keto didn't work. Carnivore didn't work. That's garbage. It does work. The problem is that you didn't sustain the behavioral change. And that is why surgeries fail, and that is why diets fail. The truth is this: the surgery doesn't fail and the diet doesn't fail. It's the person that is unable for emotion management reasons to stick to it.
Hey guys, today our guest is Dr. Robert Cywes. Dr. Cywes is one of the most unique weight loss surgeons you have ever seen. He's a kind of a doctor who focuses on lifestyle changes as the best approach to weight loss rather than weight loss surgery. That's why he uses weight loss surgery as the last resort. Dr. Cywes is highly knowledgeable and always spreads the right information about health without distortion. I highly believe that Dr. Robert Cywes is on a mission to make us conquer our carb addiction and to make us healthy. I'm very happy to invite Dr. Robert Cywes to the show. Thanks, Dr. Cywes, for coming to the show.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. It's good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert Cywes. Before we go into the interview, can you share where can people connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm obviously, I'm a South African by birth, but I live and work in Florida in the United States. I am a clinically practicing doctor and surgeon in West Palm Beach in Florida. But the best place to access me worldwide, I have two major sources of access. The first is my YouTube channel, which is Carb Addiction Doc. And there's about 160 videos on there where people can look, short videos where they can look at all our content. And it's very practical, pragmatic. Some of it's educational, but it helps people along a journey moving away from sugar and starch. And then the second place they can find me is on Instagram. Again, the same thing, Carb Addiction Doc. And for any of the women out there, my wife has a channel called Carb Addiction Mom, and we've just had a baby who's now 9 months old. So if you're a new family, if you've got a young baby and you want to raise that baby healthily without major brain issues, particularly autism spectrum disorders, that kind of thing, she provides a lot of practical information as well. So it's Carb Addiction Doc YouTube, Carb Addiction Doc Instagram, Carb Addiction Mom is the other one. And we do consults with patients worldwide. So the way to get hold of us, if you want a medical consultation, obviously I'm not licensed in India, but we can still give guidance and take people on as patients. If you text through WhatsApp, 561-517-0642, we can set up a visit. Just use the WhatsApp United States codes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cywes. So, Dr. Cywes, my first question is, many people highly believe that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. What is your opinion on that?
You know, there's several things. First of all, biologically, the way your body works, breakfast is the least important meal of the day, because the way the liver works is as soon as you wake up, when you're asleep, everything is quiet. Everything kind of goes down in terms of your biology. Your biology is at rest. It's taking a break. As soon as you wake up, we call it the dawn phenomenon. The first thing your liver does is it shoves a whole bunch of sugar into your bloodstream. The liver stores sugar and it pushes it around to the bloodstream, so your blood sugar rises, which gives you the energy to get up for the first couple of hours of your day. It's called the dawn effect. And if anybody has diabetes, they recognize that the dawn effect is one of the most challenging things because your blood sugar shoots up. So if you then eat on top of that, you're now adding to that dawn effect, and your body doesn't handle that very well. So biologically, breakfast is the least important meal of the day. However, we also have to take into account people's situations. If you're going to go out and work in the fields the whole day, and the only opportunity you get to eat is in the morning, sure, by all means eat. So there's a pragmatic component to that, and then there is a biologic component to it. But biologically, it's the least important meal of the day. But pragmatically, you've got to make that decision. The other thing also that's interesting, when we work with people that have obesity or type 2 diabetes, and the two diseases are very, very similar in that they are related, and we can talk about this, to chronic excessive carbohydrate consumption. And the obesity and diabetes are the consequence of people subconsciously shifting away from eating primarily for the nutritional value of food to eating and drinking a little bit like an alcoholic for the emotional value of eating. And they eat more sugar and starch. And as I manage my patients, once they start eating during the day, it's kind of in their head, it's in their biology, and they're continuously, almost like a smoker, looking for an opportunity to eat more. So once you start, it's very difficult to stop through the day. So the other principle we use in treating my sick patients, my metabolically sick, carb addicted patients, is to try to go as deep into the day without eating so that once you start, you don't get yourself into trouble early in the day. It lasts a little bit longer during the day. And then the final piece for people who are already metabolically challenged, who have diabetes, have metabolic syndrome, have obesity, a very close friend of mine, Jason Fung, created a concept called intermittent fasting. And intermittent fasting is where you kind of continue that biologic rest phase. The way the body works is in two separate pathways. It's all like a tide, it's ebb and flow. So when you eat, the body takes in food and has to distribute it to store it. And then between meals, you return that food from storage to be used. And the hormonal systems that govern that are very different. So if you eat right away in the first in the morning, now you're going into supply mode where you're supplying your body with nutrition. And you counteract what I call demand mode, where your cells are making a demand of food. So in the intermittent fasting principle, you go a very long time without eating to keep that dormant state, that dormant hormonal state where everything's quiet, particularly insulin, is at a low level. And that's one of the ways we use to get rid of type 2 diabetes very quickly. We try to keep that diabetes level low. And if you learn to do that on a over a long period of time, the best hours to capitalize are the time you sleep. So let's say you sleep for 8 hours at night and then you only eat at lunchtime. Now you've given yourself maybe an extra 6 or 8 hours where you haven't eaten. That's 16 hours of not eating. If you eat breakfast, you're looking at 8 hours. So it's a much shorter duration. And then your hormones turn upside down again. And in particular, if you snack on top of that, you get yourself into trouble. So for my patients, we try to get them not to eat breakfast and try to go as deep into the day without eating, so you capitalize on that intermittent fast. But obviously, you've got to look at the lifestyle. And I have patients who've done extremely well eating breakfast and lunch or eating breakfast and dinner. So it's not an absolute, but it is for most people the most convenient way to go. A long answer, but it brings so many different aspects into context.
Thank you, Dr. Cyrus. My next question is, you say that we should never purposely starve ourselves. What do you mean by that?
Correct. So there's a difference between not eating and starvation. And the difference for me is where if you are so skinny that you have almost no stores. So if you're an otherwise healthy person, you're a normal or slightly underweight or a normal weight, and you really have no fat. If you go a long period of fasting, your body still needs energy. And within 12 to 24 hours, your body runs out of sugar, which is stored in the liver. And if you don't have a lot of fat, you can run out of that pretty quickly. So the only other place you can get energy from is your muscles. And having what we call a net negative nitrogen balance, that's what I call starvation. However, if you've got extra weight or extra fat that you're trying to lose, or you're a diabetic, and you've got adequate fat storage, then when you go a long period without eating, that's not starvation. That's just fasting. That's not eating. And for example, if our Muslim friends have just come out of Ramadan, well, they go a long period of time each day without eating or drinking anything. And that's not starving. That's kind of fasting, but it's really not eating. And so that is a very healthy way to go. It is ridiculous to think that we have to eat 5, 6 small meals a day. You should be able to eat once or twice a day. That is not starving or fasting. But longer fasts, that take a long period of time, when you start breaking down your own muscles, tissue that's valuable to you, that's starvation. And there's a careful interface for different people. For someone like myself, who still has a bit of extra weight to give, starvation starts happening in 5 to 7 days. But for someone who's skinny, that can happen at 24 to 36 hours. And so you've got to understand the difference between not eating, fasting, and starvation. And I think that's an important thing for people to recognize, and it's individually based, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much, Doc. That explains so much. Doc, how to know if someone has carbohydrate addiction?
It's very simple. There's three aspects to carbohydrates. There's use, there's abuse, and there is addiction. And so one of the critical things that is important about our philosophy is that carbohydrates are not the problem. Carbohydrates are absolutely fine. The problem is not alcohol. I drink alcohol. The problem is a person's relationship with it. If I drink a glass of wine once or twice a week, that is a very healthy way to relax. The only value of alcohol is the emotional relaxation. So if I drink alcohol once or twice a week, no issue. But if I'm drinking 2 bottles of wine every day, that's a problem. It isn't the wine's fault. It is my relationship with it. It is. And in exactly the same way, carbohydrates, India is a little bit like my home country. It is a component, a composite country of um, subsistence peasant farming and very wealthy first world people. It's the spectrum. It isn't a first or a second or a third world country. It is a spectrum of all three. And if you come from a subsistence culture where you're trying to survive, carbohydrates have huge survival value. And therefore, you use them. If you're a peasant working in the fields and you eat some rice or papadam or naan twice a day, that is very healthy. There's no metabolic derangement there, and it is a source of survival. But as we get wealthier, as food becomes more abundant, and certainly here in America, that peasant community doesn't exist. We are dealing with a tsunami of excess food. So for us, it is no longer a subsistence relationship where we use carbohydrates, because otherwise we're looking at starvation. And then you've got two groups of people: those that use carbohydrates, sugar and starch, occasionally from time to time just to relax with. So, if you go out once a week to a restaurant and you have dessert, but for the rest of the time you don't, and you are otherwise normal weight and don't have any metabolic disease, then you can use carbohydrates occasionally, pig out on them. That's maybe a little bit abusive, but if you've had a bad day with carbohydrates, for the next week you don't eat them, that is a good relationship. However, once you become a type 2 diabetic, once you become morbidly obese, once you get PCOS, once you start getting gout, once you start getting the metabolic diseases associated with chronic excessive carbohydrate consumption, and your dominant calorie source is sugar and starch, and you're snacking, and I'll come back to that in a second, then you distort the reality of that relationship in order to continue it. In other words, if you're being put on metformin because of your diabetes, and you're kind of ignoring your diabetes to continue to snack and eat carbohydrate, you've lost control of that relationship. That is addiction. So carbohydrate addiction is not about carbohydrates. They have been very valuable in the sustainability and the survival of our species. And every culture has carbohydrates as a fundamental resource. It is when our relationship with them changes and we are no longer using them for the nutritional value, but we're using them for the emotional value. That's when we get into trouble. And it usually happens when food is abundant. Now, the other part that people don't understand: everybody looks at carbohydrates as a substance abuse drug, similar to nicotine, similar to alcohol. But here's the additional part with carbohydrates that doesn't exist with nicotine or alcohol. If nicotine is a pure substance addiction. If a cigarette did not contain nicotine, nobody would smoke. But when it comes to carbohydrate addiction, it's not just the sugar and the starch that we eat. There's also what we call a process addiction component. And process addiction are things like gambling, gaming, sex, pornography, cutting. People cut themselves. Those are also addictive. They're instant gratification systems, but they are part of a process addiction as opposed to substance addiction. When it comes to carbohydrate, it's the sugar and starch that is the substance addiction. But we also uniquely have two process addictions that are part of that. And a snack is always an emotional event. So if you look at this over here, it says a snack is always, always, always an emotional event. And a snack is calories that you put in your mouth for your head, whether it's carbohydrate or it could be cheese or pepperoni or a piece of tomato, it doesn't matter. A snack is always an emotional event. And when you're snacking all the time, it's equivalent to smoking, it's a process addiction. And then the other thing that we have is what we call Rottweiler Syndrome, which is where in America, for example, over the last 50 years, our portions have grown bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you've ever watched a dog eat food, particularly a big dog like a Rottweiler, no matter how much food you put in front of it, it goes, and it just eats that food. And it's so full, it's uncomfortable. But out of that discomfort, it actually gets pleasure. But it's way overeaten. So we have to consider all three when we treat carbohydrate addiction, when we treat obesity or diabetes, which are the common expressions of carbohydrate addiction. We have to treat the substance, but we have to treat the pattern snacking, and we have to treat the excessive eating for pleasure. So one of the things you'll notice is I'm sitting here, and this, by the way, is all black coffee. So I'm sitting here sipping on black coffee. Well, in my own life, I topped out at 300 pounds, which is about 140 kilos. So I was severely obese in my time. I've lost about 100 pounds, about 45 kilos. Um, and while I don't snack, and a snack by definition are calories that you eat for your head, I still need about every 20 to 30 minutes a little mind cleansing moment. So instead of a cigarette, you may chew a piece of chewing gum. That's called a redirect. Oh, I need a cigarette. Where's my gum? I need a cigarette. Where's my chewing gum? And eventually it just becomes, where's my chewing gum? Well, exactly the same has happened with me. When I was fat, this would have been a can of Coke and some M&Ms. Now, this is black coffee. It still gives me the emotional relief from snacking, but it doesn't cause me calorie harm. And I've coined the term a bridge. It bridges me over that need for something without causing me caloric harm. So when it comes to carbohydrates, when it comes to addiction, it is the substance itself plus the process, snacking and overeating. And all three of those should be addressed. But carbohydrates are innocent. It is my relationship with them in a dysfunctional way that causes harm.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cywes. It was so insightful. Thank you so much. My next question is, many people think that weight loss or bariatric surgery is the easiest option for losing weight. I was shocked to know that 85% of the weight loss surgeries result in failure long term. Can you explain why?
Right. So, by the time people come and see me and they're looking at surgery or a device or something like that, they're already experts at failing weight loss programs. They've tried a whole bunch of diets and they may have lost some weight, but it always comes back. And the reason that's a problem, and the reason diets fail in general, and surgery is just the most powerful diet out there, but it functions exactly the same as a diet. So what happens is people are focused on calories and weight loss. But the problem is that obesity is not the problem. Obesity is the result of the problem. And if you treat the result of a problem, but you don't treat the underlying cause, you're never effectively going to treat the problem. And the problem here is a migration toward using sugar and starch as a fundamental emotion management system. It's the addiction. And yes, because you're eating calories excessively, carbohydrate calories, and your body won't allow you to eat protein and fat excessively to the point of obesity, but it will allow you to eat sugar and starch excessively to the point of obesity. Just like you will never drink water to the point of harm, but you can drink alcohol to the point of harm. Alcohol is the addiction, not water. So when people develop an out of control relationship with sugar and starch and snacking, The problem then is how they manage their emotional needs. And every addictive substance has its own subset of outcomes, of bad outcomes. So if you drink alcohol, you're looking at DUIs and you're looking at liver disease. If you smoke, you're looking at lung disease and heart disease. If you're eating excessive carbohydrates, you're looking at obesity and diabetes and metabolic syndrome. And if you then treat, you see, most people think that obesity causes diabetes, that obesity causes heart disease, that obesity causes PCOS, and that's false. The only two things that obesity causes is number one, it hurts your back, your hips, your knees, your ankles. And number two is you don't look so good in your sari. Other than that, obesity causes no other harm because obesity is a consequence. And yes, we have to treat obesity through caloric reduction. But if you don't simultaneously address the addiction that caused the obesity, you're never going to solve the problem. Addressing obesity as a primary issue is like an alcoholic trying to drink less to avoid another DUI, or a smoker trying to smoke 2 cigarettes a day. It is never going to work. It works on a good day, but on a bad day, when life is throwing you a googly, I love my cricket. So when life is throwing you a beautiful spin ball and you can't see that coming, that's when you go back to your sugar and starch. Good days are easy, bad days are bad. And no matter how restricting the surgery is in terms of your caloric consumption, human beings are very smart. So what we do is we work around the surgery. And no matter what surgery you've had, band, bypass, sleeve, duodenal switch, if you still maintain that addiction, then you're going to figure out ways to eat through your surgery. And one of two things is going to happen. Either you're going to eat by snacking all the time and by drinking or consuming sloppy carbohydrates. In a 24-hour period, you're going to get massive amounts in and you're going to gain your weight back. But what we often see with surgical patients, they gain a little bit of their weight back, maybe 15 or 20%, because they can't eat that much. But their diabetes, their hypertension, their PCOS comes back. And because they're still relatively thin, nobody thinks to test them for diabetes until they have their first heart attack or their first stroke. So the metabolic component is as much part of the failure as the weight regain. And surgical failure is a little bit better than dietary failure. 85% of diets fail. Sorry, I lied. 98% of diets fail, about 85% of surgeries fail. Because if you think about this, how old are you?
25.
25. How old do you want to be when you die?
1,000.
1,000. Okay. So for easy math, because I'm not very smart when it comes to math, let's use 100. That means that you have to live for 75 years as with your current dietary principles. If you've done this to lose weight and 6 months later you've lost the weight and your diabetes is gone, well, that took 6 months or a year or maybe 2 years. What does the next 75 years look like, not only from an eating and a drinking perspective, but from an emotion management perspective? So if not eating sugar and starch, if maybe being carnivore or keto carnivore doesn't become your way of life, it is unsustainable. If this is just a diet you're doing for a short period of time, or if this is just surgery you're having to lose the weight, of course it's going to fail, because over the next 75 years, you're going to go back to the old way of doing business. Now, having said that, I do surgery, but surgery is not an alternative to addressing your relationship with carbohydrates. Nobody quits smoking the first time. We quit smoking, we fail, we relapse, we crumple up the cigarettes, we throw them away, we quit, and eventually there's a last time, and now you're not smoking. Well, when it comes to carbohydrate addiction, it's exactly the same principle. Carbohydrates are the problem. And at first, you're a little cocky, you're a little arrogant, and you say, oh, this is easy. And then you do well for 6 months, a year, 2 years, even 3 months, whatever it is, and then you crash and burn. And you become, the humility comes along with experience. And you do it over and over and over again, and then it becomes sustainable. I've been doing this for 22 years. I've had 3 major relapses in my own life. It happens. So don't think you're going to be perfect for the rest of your life, but you want to treat this as an addiction where you figure out how the relapses work. Well, if you're struggling and you can't get over relapses and you add surgery in as a tool to help you, the surgery works very effectively. But if you look to surgery as an alternative to treat obesity and you don't recognize or treat the addiction, of course it's going to fail. So in our practice, our surgical patients do extremely well because we anticipate relapses, but the surgery helps them so that they step down, so that they do well, they screw up, they level off. They don't go back to the beginning like you do on a regular diet. And we tweak things and we get them to go down and down and down. And over that time, they're dealing with their addiction. You know, the other problem, when you smoke and you want to quit smoking, the only way to quit smoking is to crumple up the cigarettes and throw them away. Okay. And if you fail on that, you've got to do that repetitively. But because people look at obesity, not carbohydrate addiction, they'll try a diet. They'll try the latest fad diet. Oh, I'm going to do intermittent fasting. And they do great and they lose a lot of weight. I'm going to do Atkins. I'm going to become a vegan. Doesn't matter what the diet is. And then they fail and they gain the weight back. But they don't say, I made a mistake. They say, this diet didn't work. And they go from diet to diet to diet to diet. And I've got so many people that come in here that tell me, oh, keto didn't work. Carnivore didn't work. That's garbage. It does work. The problem is that you didn't sustain the behavioral change. And that is why surgeries fail, and that is why diets fail. The truth is this: the surgery doesn't fail and the diet doesn't fail. It's the person that is unable for emotion management reasons to stick to it. And here's the reason why. Let's take a keto or carnivore diet. Okay. So you say, okay, carbohydrates made me fat and made me diabetic. So I'm going to get rid of carbohydrates from my life. And I'm going to replace them with only eating animal products or even only being a vegetarian. I've got a lot of some Indian patients, some Bangladeshi patients who only eat vegetables, but they do great because they don't eat carbohydrates. So the point is, they say, okay, I'm going to change my diet because I want to lose the weight or I don't want to be diabetic. And they do great there. But by the time you're obese or diabetic, if I look in your emotion management toolkit, there's basically carbohydrates and cobwebs. So when you take out the carbohydrates and you focus and you're feeling great because your diabetes is in remission, what are you going to do when life throws you a challenge? You have no resources. And of course, you're going to go back to the rice or to the candy or to whatever it may be, and you relapse. So when you stop eating sugar and starch, it doesn't matter what you do. When you stop eating sugar and starch, you leave a huge nutritional void, which all the keto people are very good at telling you what to eat. But what they don't tell you is you also leave a massive emotion management void. And if you don't focus on that as well as the other, that's what you're going to do. I'll give you another example of that is what common bad thing happens to a lot of people who successfully quit smoking? Do you know?
Um, s- Side effects like
Well, what they've quit smoking, and certainly here in the U.S., a lot of those people they successfully quit smoking, but they gain weight because the truth is they didn't really quit smoking; they just replaced nicotine as a drug with sugar as a drug, and they gained the weight. They haven't dealt with their addiction; they've just dealt with nicotine addiction, but they haven't dealt with their emotion management system. So we have to help that obese person not only to replace carbohydrates nutritionally, but also to replace carbohydrates emotionally. And if you do both of those, you're far less likely to relapse.
that's so powerful, Dr. Cyrus. It will help many people. Thank you. So, yeah.
Yeah.
My next question is: as keto and low carb diets are becoming popular, and now there are thousands of keto products out there, what's your opinion on keto products?
Yeah. Um, Keto products are like smoking a light cigarette. Okay. What in the addiction world, you got to ask yourself, why am I eating this right now? If you're going to eat keto ice cream or some keto dessert or keto pizza or whatever it is, why are you eating this? And I can assure you that you're not eating it for your nutritional need. You're eating it for your head. It is just a legitimate emotional substance. So the problem that I have with the keto stuff, the keto shakes, the keto bars, the keto products, is that they are being done primarily by a group of people who are trying to make money by leveraging this. I'll give you an example, which I absolutely love about India, that is a scourge in this country. And what India did, I don't know if what the status is right now, but I know they did this about a year or so ago. The government took a major step, and I believe this is true, is that they banned vaping. They banned vape products. Okay. So
Yes.
I know in India, a lot of people smoke. But what the tobacco companies have done here in America, if they said, oh, yes, we agree, smoking is really bad for you, but vaping is very healthy. And you know that between 35 and 50% of all children at high school right now vape. And they believe they've been sold by the tobacco companies, they've been told that vaping is healthier than smoking. So they think, ha, 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 they get this tremendous relief from nicotine and they think it's healthy for them, but it isn't. It has killed kids, it's making them sick. When it comes to keto products, it's exactly the same. It is not food. Those are still drugs in camouflage. The reason you're eating keto ice cream is not for the nutritional benefits, it's for the word ice cream. And you're still keeping the addiction alive. Your diabetes may get a little bit better, but ultimately, whether you eat keto ice cream or real ice cream doesn't matter. It's still ice cream. And therein lies the problem. So, my philosophy is this: when I look at food, if you can tell which animal or plant it came from, it's okay to eat. But if you have no idea where it came from, if it comes in a bag or a package and we've processed it, that's a problem for me. And I believe you in southern India, it's a little bit like here in Florida. The weather and the earth is very good, so you plant something here, it'll grow. Pretty much everything that you plant here, it grows. And I'm sure in southern India, if you've got a piece of land, you can plant something, it'll grow. Well, you try to plant some keto ice cream and see if it'll grow. Does that make sense? It is
Yes.
not what God and nature made. So those are just ways to feed your addiction and pretend you're okay. And that is a problem for me. So the keto lookalikes are very much on our no list. Don't do that because it's just a question of time before you relapse.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cywes. Dr. Cywes, what is your opinion on probiotics? Because I'm asking this question because like so many people are crazy about probiotics. So can you explain its
Right.
use?
So probiotics are, I understand the philosophy behind them, but a couple of things. No matter how scientifically they tell you, probiotics are just a guess. And the majority of probiotics are supportive of a plant based GI tract. So when you look at your intestine, there really are two subsets of bacteria, viruses, funguses that grow in the gut. The one group is a plant based group that are associated with a fermentation of plants because human beings, unlike cows, we can't break those plants down. We can't break cellulose down. So it's just those bacteria ferment the food and they turn vegetables into the kind of poop that we poop out as vegetarians. On the other hand, you've got a subset of bacteria, viruses, and funguses that are associated with a carnivore diet that are there to process fat and process a little bit of the gristle and other things in the human body. So I've got to make a distinction here. If you are trying to be mostly carnivore, probiotics are the single worst thing that you can do because in your intestine, you're trying to establish a carnivore based biome, and then you're taking plant based probiotics. It doesn't make sense to me. If you're a vegetarian and you eat vegetables, you're getting tons of bacteria in just with the vegetables. So you don't need those probiotics. Does this make sense? So I consider them to be primarily a wallet biopsy. The value is not there. You're spending money on something you don't need. I mean, if you think about it, what is a probiotic? I'm going to be a little bit graphic here. A probiotic is basically poop, stool. It's shit. So you're eating that literally to make you better. That doesn't make sense to me. So they've spun this beautiful story around it. Now, there are some people, if you've had a lot of antibiotics, it may be useful to eat some yogurt or to eat something like that to repopulate your gut. But to take prebiotics or probiotics is actually doing a disservice to a ketogenic or a carnivore diet.
To
The,
get,
the
yeah.
purpose, I'll tell you what, the purpose is to get healthy.
Yes.
So why are you taking additional medications and supplements to get healthy? It doesn't make sense. Surely healthy should come from the food you're eating. And then if there's still diseases that you need to treat, then you take medications to treat those diseases. But more and more on the internet, we're pitching super health. Oh, if you take this thing, you're going to be super healthy. And that allows people to ignore the hard work that goes into just being healthy. God and nature has made us pretty darn resilient from a health perspective. So it's when we eat garbage that we get into trouble. When you're eating healthy, you don't need all those supplements and all those other things to make you super healthy.
Thank you, Dr. Cywes. Like many people ask me that, can I take multivitamin tablets here? And I ask why. So,
Right. Multivitamin tablets, when you're coming from illness and moving to health, they have value for a few months. But eventually, if you're on a diet that gives you a broad spectrum of micronutrients, you get them from your micronutrients and from the restoration of normal hormonal cycling in your body. You don't need to eat them. That's the key.
thank you, Dr. Cywes. Now we have questions from subscribers. So, how should kids with autism can improve their condition with food or diet?
Sure. Well, a couple of things. Autism is a disease where the white matter, the structure of the brain, hasn't developed correctly. So the first message goes out to parents to say the problem with autism in large part is a lack of adequate healthy fat for a fetus and a newborn baby to develop their brain structure. So it is very important for a pregnant mother to eat a decent amount of fat, particularly the 3 and the 6 omega fatty acids and some of the saturated fat, to allow that baby to develop. And then it's also important, if you can at all breastfeed your baby, that's ideal. But also, when you wean that baby off their baby food, off their breast milk, it's very important to have a low carbohydrate, high fat diet for that baby. And that allows the baby's brain to develop. Excuse me. The brain continues to grow in humans structurally for the first 5 years or so of life. So during that time, if you're feeding that baby a decent amount of fat, saturated fat, um, the baby's brain will continue to develop structurally normally, and it reduces the risk of autism. So that's the first component. And most often, what we do is we wean our babies onto carbohydrates, not onto fat. So don't be afraid to give your baby fat and protein rather than sugar and starch. The second thing is, once a baby already has autism, you can't reverse that. But along with autism comes a variety of problems. And the commonest problem that we see is ADHD or ADD. In other words, attention deficit, and then also certain they don't like the way certain foods taste. So say the texture issues. And that is where, once you know that your child has an autism spectrum disorder, feeding them fats and protein is not going to change that and get rid of the autism, but it's going to give those children a more manageable approach to life. If they're able to focus a little bit more, if they're able to find healthy stimulation from what they're eating, they're not going to have that attention deficit where you're unable to teach them or train them. So you're not going to change the autism, but you're going to make them more manageable for the parents. And eventually, as older autistic kids, you're going to make their lives more manageable. So eating a decent higher fat diet, particularly animal fat or olive oil, coconut oil, and avocado oil, if you are religiously vegetarian, giving those kids those monosaccharides, those disaccharides, and maybe adding some fish oil if you can, 3 or 6 omega fatty acids, or even flaxseed oil, which is going to have. I'm not a big fan of that, but for my strict vegetarian patients, that's a good way to go. Um, Even giving them some eggs if you can tolerate that religiously, that is an excellent way to give the children adequate brain food. And that's what we're looking for. Does that make sense?
Of course, thank you so much, Dr. Cywes. Dr. Cywes, last question. Would you like to
Yeah.
issue a 7-day challenge to our subscribers?
I think the 7-day challenge is to look at, if, depending on where you are in this journey, but it doesn't matter if you're way out there and you're already carnivore or you're just thinking about doing this. Before you do anything, ask yourself 3 questions, because in large part, addiction is about ownership. It's about saying, yes, I am this person and I need to own this and I want to change. If you don't believe that you have a problem, then changing it is really, there's no incentive to change. And the last person to have ownership of a carbohydrate addiction is the person themselves. So to be able to identify the addiction, not just from the carbohydrates, but from the snacks and the eating, ask yourself 3 questions. The first question is this: don't eat or drink anything unless you absolutely know what the total carbohydrate content is, not the net carbs or like that, the total carbohydrates. And don't judge what you're eating and drinking by what the internet or somebody tells you is healthy for you. For example, an apple has twice as much sugar as a donut, and it's exactly the same sugar. It's exactly the same sugar. So if you're diabetic, the apple will spike your blood sugar as much or greater than the donut does. So get to know where the sugar is hidden. Because people say, oh, apple fruit must be healthy for me. It's healthy for a normal person, it isn't healthy for an obese or a diabetic person. So the first question is, look at your total carbohydrate consumption. And if you're obese or have type 2 diabetes, my prediction is that more than 80% of all the calories you consume are some form of sugar or starch. The second question is, look at how often you're eating. And human beings should eat more, about once or twice a day on average. Anytime you're eating, you're putting calories in your mouth more than once or twice a day, that's a snack. And it doesn't matter if it's a piece of cheese, a piece of pepperoni, a sip on a Coke. It doesn't matter if it is sugar or not. It's if it's got calories and you're eating it. The second and the third question are paired. If it's calories and you're eating it beyond twice a day, that's called a snack. And then you want to ask yourself, why am I doing this right now? And the reason is almost always emotional. It's never nutritional. If you've just had a meal, a good meal, let's say you've eaten some chicken or you've eaten an omelet or you've eaten a big salad, and now I'm full. I've eaten so much salad, I'm full. And now you're having some keto ice cream. Why are you doing that? That has nothing to do with nutrition. So you really want to look at the way your life has transformed so that the majority of your selection of food is sugar and starch and snacking and legitimizing eating for your head. Connect with the emotional aspect of eating and drinking. And for 3 days, ask those questions of yourself. On the third day, come to terms with the fact whether or not, wow, I didn't understand I was eating so much sugar and starch. Didn't understand how often I was eating. Then you affirm to yourself that this is an abusive, if not an addicted relationship. And for the next 4 days, see if you can eat once or twice a day without eating sugar and starch. And see how difficult that is at first. But after 4 days, you'll already find, wow, this is feeling so good. So your 7-day challenge is broken into 2 parts: ownership of the addiction, and then beginning to quit on the addiction. And the quitting is not just carbohydrates, it's also snacking. And if you're able to do that over 7 days, see how bad the problem is and see how difficult it is, but see that you are able to do it.
That's so wonderful, Dr. Cywes. Thank you so much for issuing that. So, Dr. Cywes, thank you once again for coming to the show and helping us to become healthy. And thank you for getting us out of the carb addiction.
Exactly. Thank you very much. It's good to be speaking to internationally to a group of people everywhere we're struggling, and I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi guys, this is Dr. Rob Cywes, and I strongly suggest that you subscribe to Bianis Doku Great. It's a great channel on YouTube.